The distant stars seemed to mock Elena as she stood on the observation deck, a silent challenge glinting in the endless expanse. The Galactic Armada was out there, poised to deliver the killing blow to an already wounded Earth. She could almost feel their anticipation, the cruel eagerness to crush what remained of humanity's resistance. Behind her, the command center buzzed with a flurry of covert activity, the last desperate motions of a species on the brink of extinction. At the center of it all, Elena stood tall, a bastion of resolve amid the chaos. "Captain." Lieutenant Tanis' voice was tight as he approached, his eyes shadowed with worry. "The Armada's latest demands have come through. They're not good." Elena turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "They never are. What do they want this time?" "Unconditional surrender." Tanis' jaw clenched. "They say we have one Earth day to comply, or they'll begin bombardment of the major cities." A cold knot formed in Elena's stomach, but she refused to let it show on her face. The Armada had played this game before, using the threat of civilian casualties to force the Earth Defense Fleet's hand. "Inform the Admiral that we'll need more time to consider his generous offer," she said, the words tasting like bile in her mouth. Tanis frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "Captain? I'm not sure. Just do it, Lieutenant," Elena snapped, harsher than she intended. She softened her tone. "Please. Trust me on this." He hesitated a moment longer before nodding curtly and returning to his station, unease still etched into his features. Elena couldn't blame him. To anyone else, her actions would seem like pure madness, a stubborn refusal to accept the inevitability of defeat. But Elena knew something the rest of her crew didn't. She knew about the Dreadnoughts. For months, Earth's greatest minds had worked in secret, pouring all their efforts into a last desperate gamble. The result was a fleet of ships unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, vessels that could harness the raw power of dark matter itself. It was a dangerous and unpredictable technology, as likely to tear a ship apart as propel it to victory. But it was also Earth's last and only hope. Elena's fingers curled around the railing as she stared out at the stars, her mind racing with possibilities and plans. The Armada thought they had already won, that Earth's surrender was nothing more than a formality. They were wrong. The Dreadnoughts were out there, hidden in the cold depths of space, waiting for the signal to strike. And when they did, the Armada would finally learn the true meaning of fear. Elena turned back to face her crew, her eyes hard with determination. "Prepare the fleet," she ordered, her voice carrying across the command center. "We have work to do." As the bridge erupted into activity, Elena allowed herself a small, grim smile. The Armada wanted a war. They were about to get one. In the depths of space, far from the prying eyes of the Galactic Armada, a hidden shipyard buzzed with frenetic energy. Sparks flew as engineers and technicians worked around the clock, their faces lined with exhaustion and grim determination. At the center of the controlled chaos stood the Dreadnoughts, looming titans of metal and dark energy. Their hulls seemed to absorb the light around them, leaving only an eerie, unnatural glow. Dr. Lena Novak watched the proceedings with a mixture of pride and trepidation, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. As the lead scientist on the Dreadnought project, she had poured her heart and soul into these ships, pushing the boundaries of known physics to give Earth a fighting chance. But even she couldn't fully predict how the dark matter reactors would behave once engaged in combat. The simulations and tests had been promising, but there was always an element of uncertainty when dealing with such exotic and poorly understood forces. "Dr. Novak." A gruff voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Admiral Yeager approaching, his weathered face set in a scowl. "I hope for all our sakes that these abominations of yours are worth the risk." Lena bristled at the Admiral's tone, but kept her own voice carefully neutral. "The Dreadnoughts are our best and only chance, Admiral. Without them, we might as well surrender now and save the Armada the trouble of annihilating us." Yeager grunted, his eyes narrowing as he studied the nearest ship. And what happens if we can't control them? What if they turn on us, or worse, fall into the Armada's hands? That won't happen, Lena said firmly, though a twinge of doubt gnawed at her. We've built in safeguards, fail-safe systems. And if worst comes to worst? She hesitated, the words sticking in her throat. We can always initiate the self-destruct sequence. The Admiral's lips twisted into a humorless smile. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Doctor. For all our sakes. He turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Lena alone with her thoughts and the looming presence of the Dreadnoughts. She looked up at the nearest ship, its dark hull seeming to swallow the light. So much rode on these untested, unpredictable marvels of engineering. The fate of an entire planet, of the human species itself. Failure was not an option. Lena squared her shoulders, pushing down the doubts and fears that threatened to overwhelm her. The Dreadnoughts would work. They had to. She had staked everything on it. On the bridge of the Galactic Armada's flagship, Admiral Karen lounged in his command chair, his reptilian features twisted into a smug grin. The view screen before him showed the blue-green orb of Earth, a fragile marble suspended in the darkness of space. Look at them, he mused, his voice dripping with disdain. So primitive, so insignificant. And yet they still cling to the delusion that they can resist the might of the Armada. His second-in-command, a hulking brute of a creature named Torzak, rumbled in agreement. They are nothing, Admiral. Mere insects to be crushed beneath our heel. Karen chuckled, a cold and mirthless sound. Indeed. And crush them we shall. How long until the deadline for their surrender expires? Torzak consulted a datapad, his thick fingers moving clumsily over the delicate screen. Less than 1 Earth hour, Admiral. Good. Karen leaned back in his chair, his eyes glittering with anticipation. Let them squirm a little longer. I want to savor the moment of their capitulation. He turned his attention back to the view screen, watching as the seconds ticked away. Soon, very soon, the Earth would be his, another jewel in the crown of the Galactic Armada's conquests. And then, the true work could begin. The subjugation of the human race, the exploitation of their resources and labor. Under his rule, Earth would learn its place in the grand order of the galaxy. Karen's grin widened, showing rows of razor-sharp teeth. He could almost taste the victory, sweet and intoxicating on his tongue. The fools on that backwater planet had no idea what was coming for them. They thought they knew fear, knew desperation. But they had seen nothing yet. The command center was a hive of barely contained chaos, a sense of desperate urgency permeating the air. Captain Elena Graves stood at the heart of it all, her eyes fixed on the main view screen where the looming shapes of the Galactic Armada's ships hung like birds of prey. Status report, she barked, her voice cutting through the din of activity. Lieutenant Tanis looked up from his console, his face drawn and pale. The Armada is holding position, Captain. But their weapons are hot, and their fighters are in launch formation. They're ready to strike at a moment's notice. Elena nodded, her jaw clenched tight. The waiting was always the worst part, the tense minutes before the storm when nerves were stretched to the breaking point and every second felt like an eternity. But she couldn't let her crew see her fear, couldn't let them know how close they all were to the precipice. They needed her strength now more than ever. And the Dreadnoughts, she asked, keeping her voice carefully level. Tanis consulted his readouts, a glimmer of hope sparking in his eyes. In position and ready, Captain. Dr. Novak reports that the dark matter reactors are stable and operating at full capacity. A ripple of murmurs ran through the command center at his words, a mix of excitement and apprehension. The Dreadnoughts were Earth's last and greatest hope, but they were also untested and unpredictable. No one quite knew what would happen when they engaged the enemy for the first time. Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Good. Keep me informed of any changes. She turned to the communications officer, a young woman named Ensign Hale. Open a channel to the Armada's flagship. It's time we had a little chat with our friend the Admiral. Hale nodded, her fingers dancing over her console. A moment later, the view screen flickered and resolved into the image of Admiral Karen, his reptilian features twisted into a sneer of contempt. "Captain Graves," he drawled, his voice dripping with mock cordiality. "I trust you have considered our offer and come to the only reasonable conclusion." Elena met his gaze unflinchingly, her own expression hard and unyielding. "I'm afraid we must respectfully decline, Admiral. Earth will not surrender, not now, not ever." Karen's eyes narrowed, a flash of anger breaking through his veneer of smugness. "You are making a grave mistake, Captain. The Armada's patience is not infinite. If you do not comply, we will have no choice but to take what is rightfully ours by force." "You're welcome to try," Elena said coldly. "But I think you'll find that Earth is not as defenseless as you believe." The Admiral's lip curled in a snarl, his composure slipping. "You dare to threaten us? You, with your primitive weapons and your pathetic fleet? You have no idea of the power you are dealing with." Elena leaned forward, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Neither do you, Admiral. Neither do you." With a flick of her wrist, she signaled Hale to cut the transmission. The view screen went dark, leaving only the reflection of the command crew's faces, set and determined. "All right," Elena said, turning to face them. "This is it. The moment we've all been waiting for. The Armada thinks they have us cornered, thinks they can bully us into submission. But they're wrong." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each and every one of her crew. "We have the Dreadnoughts. We have the courage and the determination of the human spirit. And most importantly, we have each other." A murmur of agreement rippled through the command center, a sense of unity and purpose settling over them all. "Whatever happens out there today," Elena continued, her voice ringing with conviction, "I want you to know that it has been an honor serving with each and every one of you. You are the best crew a captain could ask for, and I am proud to stand with you in this fight." She squared her shoulders, her gaze hardening with resolve. "Now let's go show the Armada what humanity is really made of." A cheer went up from the crew, a roar of defiance and determination that shook the very bulkheads of the ship. Elena felt a surge of pride and love for these brave men and women, willing to risk everything in defense of their home and their species. She turned back to the view screen, watching as the Armada's ships began to move, their formation shifting into attack position. It was now or never, the moment of truth. One way or another, the fate of Earth would be decided in the next few hours. Elena's hand tightened on the railing, her knuckles turning white. "All ships, prepare for battle," she ordered, her voice steady and clear. "Dreadnoughts, you have the green light. Give them hell." On the bridge of the lead dreadnought, a cheer went up as Captain Graves' order came through. Commander Ivanov, a grizzled veteran of countless battles, grinned fiercely as he turned to his crew. "You heard the lady," he growled, his eyes glinting with anticipation. "Let's show these Armada bastards what we're made of. Charge up the dark matter cannons and prepare to fire on my mark." The bridge crew scrambled to obey, their faces set with grim determination. They knew the risks, knew that this untested technology could just as easily tear them apart as grant them victory. But they also knew what was at stake, the fate of their families, their friends, their entire world resting on their shoulders. Ivanov watched as the readouts on his console climbed higher and higher, the dark matter reactors thrumming with barely contained power. He could feel the ship vibrating beneath his feet, the hull straining against the immense forces being channeled through it. "Steady," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Steady." The Armada ships loomed closer on the view screen, their weapons glowing with deadly intent. Ivanov's finger hovered over the firing control, his heart pounding in his ears. "Come on," he whispered, his eyes locked on the enemy. "Just a little closer." And then, with a roar that shook the very fabric of space itself, the dreadnoughts opened fire. Beams of pure darkness lanced out from their cannons, slamming into the Armada's ships with devastating force. For a moment, Ivanov could only stare in awe at the destruction being wrought before him. The Armada's shields flared and failed under the onslaught, their hulls buckling and tearing like paper. Explosions blossomed in the darkness, brief flares of light that were quickly swallowed by the void. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, a display of raw power and fury that defied comprehension. The dreadnoughts moved with a grace and precision that belied their size, weaving through the enemy formation like dancers in a lethal ballet. But the Armada was not so easily defeated. Even as their ships burned and died around them, they fought back with a savage ferocity, their own weapons lashing out at the dreadnoughts with desperate intensity. Ivanov gritted his teeth as his ship shuddered under the impact of an enemy barrage, warning lights flashing across his console. "Shields down to 60%, someone shouted, their voice tight with fear. "Reroute power from the engines," Ivanov snapped, his mind racing. "And keep firing, damn it. We can't let up now." The battle raged on, a swirling maelstrom of fire and darkness that lit up the cosmos like a supernova. Ships on both sides were torn apart, reduced to drifting wreckage and glowing embers. But slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. The dreadnought's superior firepower and agility began to take their toll, the Armada's ranks thinning and breaking under the relentless assault. Ivanov felt a surge of wild hope as he watched the enemy ships falling back, their formation crumbling into disarray. They were winning. Against all odds, against every projection and simulation, they were actually winning. And then, with a final, desperate push, it was over. The last of the Armada's ships broke and fled, their engines flaring as they disappeared into the depths of space. On the bridge of the lead dreadnought, a cheer went up, a primal roar of triumph and relief. Ivanov sagged back in his chair, his heart hammering in his chest. They had done it. They had beaten the Armada, had saved Earth from annihilation. It seemed almost too good to be true, like a dream from which he might wake at any moment. But it was real. The proof was all around him, in the jubilant faces of his crew, in the glowing wreckage of the enemy ships drifting outside the viewport. Ivanov closed his eyes, a smile spreading across his face. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel something he had thought lost forever. Hope. The mood on Earth was one of stunned disbelief and euphoria as news of the dreadnought's victory spread like wildfire. People took to the streets in spontaneous celebrations, tears of joy and relief flowing freely as they embraced one another, their faces alight with a newfound sense of hope and possibility. In the command center, Captain Elena Graves watched the festivities unfold on the viewscreens, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was a moment she had dreamed of for so long, a moment she had almost given up hope of ever seeing. But even as she savored the triumph, a part of her couldn't help but wonder what came next. The Armada had been defeated, but they were not destroyed. They would regroup, would come back stronger and more determined than ever to crush humanity's resistance. And then there was the matter of the dreadnoughts themselves. The dark matter technology had proven itself in battle, but it was still unpredictable, still dangerous. Elena knew that they would need to be careful, to study and refine the technology to ensure that it didn't become a threat to the very people it had been created to protect. But those were concerns for another day. For now, there was only the sweet taste of victory, the knowledge that against all odds, they had prevailed. Elena turned to Lieutenant Tanis, who was grinning from ear to ear as he watched the celebrations on the screens. "We did it, Captain," he said, his voice giddy with relief. "We actually did it." She nodded, clapping him on the shoulder. "We did. And it's thanks to the bravery and dedication of everyone on this crew, and every man and woman who fought out there today." Her gaze turned distant, her mind already racing ahead to the challenges that lay before them. But the fight isn't over yet. The Armada will be back, and we need to be ready. We need to fortify our defenses, to build more dreadnoughts and train more crews to operate them. Tanis sobered at her words, the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. You're right, Captain. We can't afford to let our guard down, not even for a moment. Elena turned to face him fully, her expression serious. I want you to take charge of the Dreadnought program, Tanis. Work with Dr. Novak and her team to streamline production and training. We need a fleet that can go toe-to-toe with anything the Armada can throw at us. Tanis straightened, a look of determination hardening his features. Yes, Captain. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Elena said softly, a hint of pride in her voice. None of us will. As Tanis hurried off to begin his new duties, Elena turned back to the view screens, watching as the celebrations continued to unfold across the planet. It was a moment of joy, of relief, of hard-won triumph against impossible odds. But even as she watched, Elena could feel the weight of the future pressing down on her, the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and hard, filled with challenges and sacrifices that they could scarcely imagine. But they would face them together, as a united Earth, a species determined to forge its own destiny among the stars. And with the power of the Dreadnoughts at their backs, Elena knew that anything was possible. Far above the celebrating crowds, in the silent depths of space, a lone ship drifted, its hull battered and scorched from the ferocious battle that had raged around it. On the bridge, Admiral Karen sat slumped in his command chair, his reptilian features twisted in a mask of shock and disbelief. They had lost. The mighty Galactic Armada, the scourge of 1,000 worlds, had been beaten back by a ragtag fleet of primitive ships and their newfound dark matter weapons. It was a humiliation beyond comprehension, a blow to the very foundation of the Armada's power and prestige. Karen's fists clenched and unclenched at his sides, rage and shame warring in his heart. He had underestimated the humans, had dismissed them as weak and insignificant. And now, he had paid the price for his arrogance. But even as he seethed with fury, a cold, calculating part of his mind was already working, already planning for the future. The humans had won a victory, yes, but it was only a temporary setback. The Armada would regroup, would learn from its mistakes and adapt its tactics. And next time, there would be no mercy, no quarter given. The humans would learn the true cost of defying the will of the Galactic Armada. Karen straightened in his chair, his eyes burning with a newfound determination. He would not rest until he had crushed the human resistance, until he had ground their pathetic little planet beneath his heel. It was only a matter of time. In the depths of the Dreadnoughts engineering section, Dr. Elena Novak stood before the pulsing heart of the dark matter reactor, her eyes wide with wonder and trepidation. The battle had pushed the technology to its limits, had strained the very fabric of space and time itself. And yet, somehow, it had held together, had channeled the awesome power of dark matter into a weapon that had turned the tide of the war. It was a triumph beyond her wildest dreams, a validation of all the years of hard work and sacrifice. But even as Lena marveled at the achievement, a part of her couldn't help but worry about the implications. The dark matter technology was still poorly understood, its long-term effects on both the ships and their crews a mystery. And then there was the question of what would happen if it fell into the wrong hands, if the Armada or some other hostile power managed to reverse-engineer the technology for their own purposes. Lena shuddered at the thought, her mind recoiling from the possibilities. They would have to be careful, would have to guard the secrets of the Dreadnoughts with their lives. The fate of not just Earth, but the entire galaxy, could depend on it. Dr. Novak? A voice interrupted her thoughts, and Lena turned to see one of her assistants, a young woman named Maya, standing in the doorway. Sorry to disturb you, but we've just received a message from Captain Graves. She wants a full report on the Dreadnoughts' performance in the battle, and any recommendations for improvements or upgrades. Lena nodded, a determined set to her jaw. Tell the captain that I'll have the report ready within the hour. And let her know that we're already working on ways to optimize the dark matter reactors and improve their efficiency. Maya hurried off to relay the message, leaving Lena alone with the pulsing reactor and her own thoughts. She had a feeling that this was only the beginning, that the Dreadnoughts and the dark matter technology would play a crucial role in the battles to come. And she would be ready, would pour every ounce of her knowledge and expertise into making sure that they were the best they could be. Because now, more than ever, the fate of humanity rested on the strength and ingenuity of its defenders. And Lena would not let them down, not as long as there was breath in her body and fire in her heart. She turned back to the reactor, her eyes gleaming with a fierce determination. There was work to be done. In the weeks following the Dreadnoughts' decisive victory over the Galactic Armada, a sense of cautious optimism settled over Earth. The planet had been given a reprieve, a chance to catch its breath and prepare for the inevitable counterattack. But Captain Elena Graves knew that they could not afford to rest on their laurels. The Armada was still out there, licking its wounds and plotting revenge. And they had to be ready for them when they came. Under Elena's guidance, the Earth Defense Fleet launched a massive mobilization effort, pouring resources into the construction of new dreadnoughts and the training of their crews. Dr. Novak and her team worked around the clock to refine the dark matter technology, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But even as they raced against time, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting against an enemy that was always one step ahead. The Armada had vast resources at their disposal, and a ruthless determination to crush any opposition to their rule. And then there were the whispers, the rumors of dissent and unrest among the ranks of the fleet. Some questioned the wisdom of relying so heavily on the untested dreadnoughts, arguing that they were a dangerous and unpredictable weapon. Others wondered if the cost of victory was too high, if the sacrifices demanded of them were more than they could bear. Elena did her best to quell the doubts and fears, to keep her crew focused on the task at hand. But even she couldn't deny the growing sense of unease that gnawed at her, the feeling that they were racing towards an uncertain future. And then, just when it seemed that things couldn't get any worse, a new threat emerged from the depths of space. A massive Armada fleet, larger and more powerful than anything they had ever seen before, dropped out of hyperspace on the edges of the solar system. Elena stared at the readouts in disbelief, her heart sinking as she realized the scale of the challenge they now faced. The Armada had learned from their defeat, had adapted their tactics and their technology. And now they were back, with a vengeance. "All hands to battle stations," she barked, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "Prepare to engage the enemy." As the klaxons blared and the crew scrambled to their posts, Elena took a moment to close her eyes and gather her thoughts. She knew that the odds were stacked against them, that they were facing an enemy that outmatched them in every way. But she also knew that they had no choice but to fight, to stand and defend their home and their way of life. And with the power of the dreadnoughts at their back, she believed that anything was possible. "Dreadnoughts, you have the go-ahead to engage," she said, her voice ringing out over the comms. "Give them hell." And with those words, the battle began anew, a desperate struggle for survival against an implacable foe. Beams of dark energy lanced out from the dreadnoughts' cannons, slamming into the Armada's ships with devastating force. But the enemy had learned from their previous encounter, had adapted their shields and their weapons to better withstand the onslaught. And they fought back with a savage ferocity, hammering at the dreadnoughts with everything they had. On the bridge of the lead dreadnought, Commander Ivanov gritted his teeth as his ship shuddered under the impact of the enemy barrage. Warning lights flashed across his console, and the stench of burning circuitry filled the air. "Shields down to 20%, someone shouted, their voice tight with fear. "Reroute all power to the forward cannons," Ivanov snapped, his mind racing as he tried to find a way to turn the tide. "And prepare to unleash everything we've got." The dreadnought shuddered again, a bone-jarring impact that sent sparks flying from shattered consoles. Ivanov clung to his chair, his knuckles white as he watched the enemy ships closing in, their weapons glowing with deadly intent. And then, with a final, desperate push, he gave the order. The dark matter cannons roared to life, a blinding surge of energy that ripped through the void like a scythe through wheat. The Armada ships in its path simply vanished, reduced to glowing embers and drifting wreckage in an instant. But even as Ivanov watched in awe, he knew that it wasn't enough. The Armada's numbers were too great, their firepower too overwhelming. One by one, the Dreadnoughts fell, torn apart by the relentless onslaught. And then, with a final, shuddering blast, the lead Dreadnought's shields failed entirely. Ivanov barely had time to shout a warning before the bridge exploded around him, a maelstrom of fire and shrapnel that consumed everything in its path. In the command center, Elena watched in horror as the Dreadnoughts winked out of existence, one by one. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the magnitude of their defeat, the terrible cost of their hubris. They had gambled everything on the power of the dark matter technology, had staked the fate of their entire species on an untested weapon. And now, they were paying the price. As the last of the Dreadnoughts fell, Elena closed her eyes, a bitter sense of resignation settling over her. They had fought bravely, had given everything they had to defend their home and their way of life. But in the end, it hadn't been enough. The Armada had won, and Earth was now at their mercy. Elena's hand tightened on the railing, her jaw clenched with a fierce determination. They had lost the battle, but the war was not over yet. As long as there was breath in her body, as long as there was a single human left standing, they would keep fighting. Because surrender was not an option. Not now, not ever. The aftermath of the battle was a bleak and bitter time for the people of Earth. The loss of the Dreadnoughts had been a crushing blow, a defeat that had shaken the very foundations of their resistance. In the days that followed, the Galactic Armada tightened its grip on the planet, imposing harsh new restrictions and cracking down on any signs of dissent. The once vibrant cities became ghost towns, their streets empty and silent save for the clank of Armada patrols. But even in the darkest of times, hope endured. In secret underground bunkers and hidden rebel bases, the remnants of the Earth Defense Fleet gathered, licking their wounds and plotting their next move. At their head was Captain Elena Graves, her face lined with grief and exhaustion but her eyes still burning with a fierce determination. She had lost friends and comrades in the battle, had watched helplessly as the Dreadnoughts fell one by one. But she refused to give up, refused to let their sacrifices be in vain. As long as there was a single human left standing, as long as there was a breath left in her body, she would keep fighting. "We need a new plan," she said, her voice steady as she addressed the ragtag group of survivors. "The Armada thinks they've broken us, that we're beaten and cowed. But they're wrong. We still have one weapon left, one card left to play." She turned to Dr. Novak, who stood beside her, her face drawn and haggard. "The dark matter technology," Elena said softly. "Can it be adapted, used in a different way?" Novak hesitated, her eyes haunted by the memory of the Dreadnought's destruction. "It's possible," she said slowly. "But it would be risky. We still don't fully understand the technology, and any mistakes could be catastrophic." Elena nodded, her jaw set with determination. "We have to try," she said firmly. "We have no other choice." And so, in the depths of their hidden base, the remnants of the Earth Defense Fleet began their final, desperate gambit. Under Dr. Novak's guidance, they worked to modify the dark matter technology, to turn it from a weapon of destruction into a tool of salvation. It was a race against time, a desperate struggle to stay one step ahead of the Armada's ever-tightening net. But slowly, painfully, they made progress. A new weapon began to take shape, a device that could harness the power of dark matter in a way that had never been done before. And then, just when it seemed that all hope was lost, they received a message from an unexpected ally. The Galactic Alliance, a loose confederation of worlds that had long chafed under the Armada's rule, had heard of their plight and offered their support. It was a risk, trusting in the word of strangers, but Elena knew that they had no other choice. And so, with a heavy heart, she made the decision to leave Earth behind, to take their fight to the stars. As they prepared to depart, Elena took one last look at the planet that had been her home for so long. The once blue skies were now choked with the smoke of burning cities, the once green fields now scorched and barren. But even in the midst of the devastation, she could see the glimmers of hope, the small pockets of resistance that still flickered in the darkness. And she knew that as long as those embers remained, as long as there was a single human left standing, the fight would go on. "We will come back," she whispered, a promise to herself and to all those who had sacrificed so much. "We will make this right." And with those words, she turned her back on Earth and set out into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road would be long and hard, the battles brutal and unforgiving. But they would not falter, would not yield. For they carried with them the hopes and dreams of an entire species, the fierce, unyielding determination of the human spirit. And in the end, that would be enough. It had to be. As the ship carrying the last of Earth's defenders disappeared into the vast expanse of space, a sense of profound change settled over the galaxy. The old order had been shattered, the balance of power forever.